Yep. Okay, so we're recording. My guest. Oh, there we go. We're recording. So my guest tonight is Riley Toon. He is a. Now I have to ask this too. Do you prefer science fiction or speculative fiction, or I know that's a debate in and of itself.
Yeah, I usually tell people science fiction, sci-fi fantasy, or sometimes I even say urban fantasy writer.
Okay. All right. So we'll go with urban. I like that too. Well, you're an urban fantasy writer.
Mm,
Um, you're based here in Raleigh.
yep.
And I'm going to throw this in there as a plug because this is where I was introduced to your work. You were from Halifax County, Virginia,
Yes.
correct? Okay,
Yep.
cool.
Hometown.
Halifax, Virginia. That's actually I really liked. I love that part of the world. It's a fun place. It has some advantages and some disadvantages. So I'm going to throw
Right.
that out there.
Low cost
But
of living.
what's yeah, low cost of living, that's for certain. Um,
Yes.
but if you can you introduce yourself to our students and talk a little bit about your writing and your marketing? You're successful in that regard as well. So if you can talk to us about that.
Yeah. Um, Thanks for having me.
Sure.
My name is Riley Toon. I have been writing for the better part of a decade, and I've been making money from my writing for maybe about 4 or 5 years. Good money, money that it's to the point that now I have to worry about filing stuff correctly on taxes. Um, and it all started as an avenue for me to just have a creative outlet. Um, from an early young age, I've always been into superheroes and games and all the stuff that back in the day was considered nerdy, but now it's very trendy. And I actually got into writing by accident. It originally started with me wanting to be an actor, believe it or not. And from a small town of Halifax, I told my mother that I wanted to move to California and be an actor. Which, of course, if you're familiar with Halifax, coming from that and going to California is just like night and day of the biggest the biggest comparison. And I'm the only child, so she wasn't really supportive of that. And her approach was to say, well, you don't know anything about acting or movies or TVs. Have you even ever seen a script? And I told her, you know what, I haven't. And I started to do some research and I tried to learn how to read a script. And one of the little self-help books I was reading at the time suggested that if you want to learn how to read a script correctly, you should try to write a script. And so that's what I did. I was going to Danville Community College at the time, and I went to the library and I would just pluck at it every day. And after a while, the bug slowly started to catch me, and I really enjoyed the writing process and making up these stories and just having the ability to do whatever I wanted to do with no restrictions. And that was the spark that led me to here. I scrapped the acting dream. Mom was happy, and I've been writing ever since. And I'm a one-stop shop. I handle. We can talk about a little bit more in depth as we go on, but I do everything. I handle. I'm a one-stop shop in regards to that. I do the writing, and then I front the bill for everything else. So I hire a person to do my editing. I hire a person to do my covers. I created my own website. I run the website. I handle all of my marketing ventures. Some are free, some I pay for. And if I ever get like someone who reaches out to me via my Twitter or my personal website or even my YouTube channel, which is a story I'll tell you later on as we keep going, um, they find you anywhere. But it's me. It's me writing back to people. It's 100% all Riley.
Well, yeah, I appreciated the fact that when I sent you an email, I was so surprised to get back a response from you from your and I wouldn't have expected anything less from again from a Halifax guy, but
Yeah.
but um that's I have approached other authors at other libraries, and you get an agent, and uh you know it's it's almost sticker shock when they'll say, hey,
Yeah.
here's this person that they have this XYZ, and it's just, oh my goodness, and so it's very different to get that person right away, which was cool. It was fun. I appreciated and appreciate more than you have any idea of coming.
Thank you.
So you mentioned your marketing. Now, if you can, if you're comfortable, brag on yourself just a little bit about your marketing and your success as a marketer. And then also too, talk if you can, just a little bit, we'll satiate this. Talk a little bit about how you have marketed yourself as an author, and maybe even does that translate? So I've given you three questions. Does that translate into other kinds of marketing? So
Gotcha.
brag, how did you do it, and does that translate?
it the bragging portion of it, first and foremost, is that the marketing, especially if you're an independent writer like myself, I'm trying to do the hybrid route. So I'm independent now, and now that I have some stats and some records and some accomplishments, now I'm searching for the agent portion. But in this world of writing and trying to get in front of people, the marketing is going to be paramount. The marketing is going to be almost as important as the quality of your writing. I've got a couple of students that are interested in learning how to write, and I tell them that portion, and they're blown away by it. But you can have a fantastic story, but if the people don't know what's out there, they're never going to find it. And if you go into any traditional store, think about all the books you see on the bookshelf. There's tons of them, and unless they have those big names that get that front placement, all these other fantastic books you're never going to see. So you have to have a presence about yourself. So for me, bragging wise, the marketing is what gets me most of my money. That's where the money comes from. Just trying to be creative with that portion piece. The actual writing the story, that's easy. That's the fun part. That's just me getting the voices out of my head, putting it on paper, and having an outlet for it. But the actual work starts with the marketing. But with the marketing, it's where you generate the most income possibility. So with the marketing, for me, what helped is that I went in with a game plan, did a lot of research early, and you have to really utilize almost any avenue you can think of. That's for me in writing. That's Goodreads. That's Twitter. That's Instagram if you're on it. Facebook is one if you're big into Facebook. And then also doing a lot of footwork and checking out companies, YouTube channels, different websites and organizations that offer free and not free, free and paid versions of marketing. And it can become a little bit of a daunting task. So, and on my side, it was easy because it was all that I thought about, especially for those first 2 or 3 books. That was my bread and butter, and that was everything I thought about because I had these stories, but I wasn't getting the clicks, I wasn't getting the downloads. What's going on? And I couldn't determine if my work was any good if I didn't put it in front of people. So after the writing was done, I shifted gears, and everything I did was marketing focused, and that's going to be the big thing to get your book in front of people. One of the students that I have now, he's a fantastic writer, really creative, loves the writing process, hates the marketing portion. And as a default, his good story is pretty much extended to friends and family and a couple of people who stumble across it. There is no, he doesn't have a website, he doesn't have a Goodreads page, he doesn't have an author presence online anywhere. So nobody has a reason to look for his book. And he's an independent writer, so he's not gonna land in the Barnes and Noble or anything like that unless he does the additional footwork, which falls into the marketing. So it's paramount, and I take that and I transition that to anything you do, especially in this social media internet world that we live in now. If you have a business of any sort, mine just happens to be writing, but if you have a business of any sort and you're not marketing it, you're not putting your product in front of the people, you're not spreading the word. I hate to say it, but you're never gonna get off the ground. You're never gonna get to where you go. Uh, Hard work only gets you there some of the time. The rest of you really gotta really put in the work. I feel like I did a word vomit, and I feel like I missed off a piece of the a piece of the question.
No, you hit it. You hit your success. You hit how you've done it, and you hit. Oh, now I've forgotten the third section.
The bragging piece.
Yeah, the transition. Yeah, how that transition. I'll say that's how I found out about you and found out about your work was word of mouth. Um, and then I read what you've written and I read your books that we had in the library, and then from there on it was, oh, you want science fiction, you want you kind of want
Mm,
that genre. I would point people, right to you. I could
thank you.
to this day find those books in the library almost blindfolded because it was like, hey, these are good. This is what, if this is what you're after, then by all means, uh, try this guy, see what you think. So that word of mouth, that marketing, it pays off.
Yeah, it really does, man. The
It's
amount
it's
of
a
people that trickle through is surprising. Uh,
Yeah.
it's it's weird. People will reach out to me through avenues that you don't even expect, and
Hmm.
and I think it's like a scam until I look into it because you just don't expect those things to happen to you. But it's cool when it does, man.
Well, and you've gotten yourself, as a self-published author, into Barnes and Noble,
Yeah,
which is, that I mean that is that's huge because like you said, it's, if you're not James Patterson and Stuart Wood and Stephen King, you're not getting
it's
there.
hard.
And then if you are getting there, you're not getting that prime placement. um yeah, so that's fantastic. I mean, that's amazing
It's
in and
hard,
of itself.
and I appreciate it, man. Thank you. And the crazy part about it, there's like it's like a book war going on behind the scenes, and
Hmm.
even if you go to like the traditional mom and pop stores and I say, hey, my name is Riley. I wrote these books. I have everything that you need for them. I have an ISBN number. You can order them online. You can order them on Amazon. You can order them on Barnes and Noble's website. I'd love to do a book signing here or donate some copies to the store so that we can just spread the word about my book. And I'm a local writer. And you would think to yourself, okay, well, maybe you take a little bit of a hit up front and you pay for those books and you get them out into the streets and then more people come and ask for them, or that might direct them to your website and then they go ahead and download an audiobook or something like that. But a lot of the local mom and pop bookstores in the area, in Raleigh and Cary and Morrison and Durham, if you publish through Amazon, they don't allow it because they're stomping out the business. So it's one of those things that I had to learn about and I had to pivot real time. They don't mess with you if you work with Amazon, but if you publish through a different one like Ingram Spark, and that's where you will go through if you want like your hardcover books, that they will allow. So it's a lot of give and take. It's just one of those things that you don't know about until you're like, you're finished and you're out there hitting the pavement trying to spread the word and get your books out there into people's hands. So if anyone's out there sees this, they want to write, be mindful that going into a mom and pop store is not going to be as easy as they make it look on TV.
I was listening to an interview with Bob Odenkirk, the
Okay.
comedic writer, and his comment was, Hollywood has these out of nowhere stories, and they have to have those out of nowhere stories because they're fiction. He's like, you don't just end up in Hollywood, and it sounds like what you're saying now is you just
Yeah.
don't end up with your book in Barnes and Noble, or anywhere really for that matter.
No.
Let me ask you this. This may get down into the weeds and kind of nerdy. In the publishing industry, did going to Amazon, because you went to Amazon first, right? And
Hmm.
then did print. Going through Amazon, did that? What's the trade-off with that? Um,
There are
with going
some.
to Amazon, because I know there's pluses, but I know there's a lot of minuses as well. What are some of the pluses and minuses of that?
It's a good question, and so the big thing with Amazon is that they're the biggest game in town, and Amazon has earned the they've earned the high ground for lack of a better term. So they can kind of tell you what they want to tell you, and you kind of have to bite the bullet if you want to earn, if you want all of those resources. Um, so when you're ready to publish, you can do an ebook, you can do a physical copy. They even have it now where you can do like short stories or like a series, like a serial. So like you might upload one chapter this week and then another chapter next week. You just release it on like a bi-weekly schedule or whatever it is. The process is super easy, seamless. It's almost as easy as just ordering something off of Amazon. As long as you got the measurements right for your templates and stuff, and if you don't know them, they got it so you can download. You gotta have your picture right, and if your picture's not right, they got it so they can help you walk through it. Their customer service is fantastic. Um, so they have all the stuff under a one-stop shop. But the trade-off is that you bump into some things, kind of like what I just mentioned. Where some people don't like it. You do have to give them a portion of the proceeds, depending on how much you put your ebooks for. The funny part about it is you make more money the cheaper you put your books. So if I put an ebook up for like $2.99, they take a larger chunk out of it than if I put the book up for 99 cents. So that's why most ebooks are 99 cents. It's not because the writers just trying to give it to you for the cheap. They just know that if they sell enough product, at the back end of the day, they'll make more money if they sell it for 99 cents. And the Amazon gets really, the big trade-off comes when you venture into the world of audiobooks. Audiobooks is where I make most of my money, to the point that I don't even really check physical book sales. That sounds snobby, but it's because I wasn't moving nearly as many as I was for the audiobooks. And even myself, I don't read. I listen to audio because I'm so busy. And Amazon, you don't get a chance to choose how much you want your book to be. So, for example, when I released my first book, they just threw it in at like 19 bucks. And then when you put your second book out, if it's in a series, they kind of try to gauge how well that first book did, and then they'll adjust that price. And if your book doesn't do that well, you really don't have anything to worry about. If your book does well, then you have to worry about alienating your fans. And so when I did Paragon, which was my superhero series, I honestly didn't expect it to do well because my first series, the Warper series, it did okay, but it wasn't to the point that I was like, oh man, I've got money coming. But Paragon kind of took off, and I guess it was just around that time when superheroes were really popular. Thank you, Marvel, because writing has trends. Like you went to your Harry Potter trend and your 50 Shades of Grey trend and your Twilight trend, all of those, and now it's like the superhero time. So when your first book does well, the second one they can jack it up as high as they want to because they assume people are going to purchase it. And on the flip side, if the book doesn't do well, they can drop it down as much as they want to too. You have access to all of their resources and their distribution, which is quite wide, but you don't have say on how much money you want to sell it for. Then you also have to give them not a lion's share, but it's a good amount. So I split my audiobooks with my voice guy, and you can choose to give your voice people upfront money or half money. But once again, Amazon, because they have so much in control under that umbrella, they have all the voice people in one big database. Once you tell them you're looking for work, you upload a little section of your story like a script, and then they audition for you. And that's all Amazon. But your voice guy gets whatever Amazon leaves you. So easy math, Amazon takes about 40%, give or take, unless the prices have fluctuate. And then after that 40%, you split the rest of it with your book guy. So I could make $6,000 worth of money from that book 1 month, but I'm only getting 30% of it because of the contracts, and that stays that way for 7 years, I do. So you can stop splitting. Amazon always takes their half. They're like they're like the mafia. So you lose control in regards to how much money you could potentially make, but you kind of offset that with the power of Amazon being behind it. Distribution for it. Their brand is so recognized. It's so easy to download and stuff, you're kind of just grin and bear it. Because otherwise, who you gonna go to? It's almost how that should just be on their website. Amazon. Who else you gonna go to? And that's essentially how it is.
Um, here goes. So switching gears just a little bit,
Mhm.
because you mentioned, um, and we're gonna time. That was for the marketing folks that might join in. Let's switch gears a little bit to the English, uh,
Okay.
the English side of stuff and the writing side, the writing of it, because like everything, I guess there's a light bill. Somebody once told me there's always a light bill. Like you
Yeah.
always are, you're always going to have to deal with that. So that side is, and I'm sure we could probably talk for another 2 hours about that, but I want to respect your time too. Um, so let me ask you this: as far as you mentioned this too, where did the idea of urban fiction and sci-fi, and where did that come from in you? Is that from your background, or is that something you've discovered?
It's it's a little bit of both. So I've always been into those things since I was small. Comic books, superhero stuff, cartoony things, and I've always had an overactive imagination. Um, when I first got into writing, that was not the idea because a lot of the stories I was introduced to were more witches and wizards and Middle Earthy type things, and characters were like dwarves and predominantly white cast, things like that. And after a while, I started looking for like specific books. Like I was so deep into like just nerd stories that I was looking for certain things. And I was to the point I was like, I'd kind of like to read something about a guy who can teleport because I just saw that movie Jumper or something like that. And so I went looking for it, and that's when I found out that Jumper was actually a book. And that's when I found out for the first time that a book and a movie are drastically different. So
Mm,
I went into the book expecting what I saw in the movie, and it was not even really close. And had been playing with the idea of like what type of story I should write. And the very very first story I wrote was a superhero theme story because that's what I liked, and I thought it would be easy to write that. And the story was terrible, terrible. And then I scratched it and thought, I should do the Middle Earthy thing. That's what I see most people do, and that's the reading and stuff that I've seen the most. That's the stuff that makes it to TV. It's got to be popular. And I didn't like it, man. It was just really hard for me to pull that creative piece to the front when I was forcing myself to write a story that wasn't mine. It's easy to lose yourself in the stuff that you like. So for me, myself, whenever I write, I try not to listen to anything or be influenced by anything that's in the realm of what I'm trying to write because I want my ideas to be my own. And that was a hard piece for me at front. That was a hard piece for me at first to understand. So when I was writing those pages, it just none of it made sense. I didn't connect with any of the characters. It was just really bad writing, and I didn't even like the story I was writing. So I scrapped it. And I thought, okay, well, maybe I should just go do something else. And that's when I was looking for those uh, teleporting style books. And the reason I was looking for those books is because I wanted to make sure the idea that I was coming with didn't seem cliche. So if I couldn't find something similar to it on the shelf, then I felt like it was a good way to go. And that's when I discovered that it was kind of hard for me to find anything on the shelves. And so I was like, okay, well let's go with this. And then it took me a little while, and I started slowly pulling back the pieces. And that was the story that I came up with. And that's where my first book came from. And after that, I kind of did some self-help stuff. I started listening to podcasts about from some of my favorite writers. I even attended a college course. You'd be surprised what you could find for free. Most of your favorite writers teach college classes that other students pay for, but most of those classes are also uploaded to YouTube for free. The whole curriculum, homework assignments, and all. And I attended those things like I paid for it. Took notes, the whole shebang, and I took everything I learned and then I put it back into the book. And I started to rewrite that very very first book I wrote that was trash, and that became my best-selling book, which was Paragon. So it was a full cycle thing, but it was a lot of A lot of trial and error. I even got kicked out of a Barnes Noble one time when I was trying to do it because I was early in my stage. I didn't know how to create characters, so I was following people around and like taking notes. And when you see a large man following you around and jotting stuff down, this is before computers and everyone had one. You know, people start to complain. So it was like one of those things. So it was a lot of trial and error before I got to the point where I could pull those ideas to the front and start putting it down and have it make sense.
So that's quite a process in and of itself, and then you throw the marketing on top of it, and um, so I guess in that story, you had the one story that you trashed. You didn't end up trashing it, but you trashed it. You
Yeah.
tried to do the Middle Earth, which is, I guess, everything that I've been reading about science fiction and some of the science fiction that I've talked about is that in science fiction fantasy, um, the fantasy is what gets the most play. It seems like too because it doesn't have to be quite as technical. Um,
You're right.
so, but then I've also read and heard discussed the idea that there's like the speculative and then there's the science fiction. Science fiction is more like an engineer's written it. Speculative is
Right.
more. So I have to ask this too: is how much of that sciencey the science stuff? How do you get around the fact that I assume you're not an engineer or anything like that?
No,
How do
no.
you how do you get that? How do you get that in your mind to work?
I try to keep it simple, but then also take it for what it is on face value. That one of the big reasons why I don't go deep into the world of science fiction, as you mentioned, like some of that stuff has to be true. And if it's not, the readers will let you know. Some science fiction books I've read, I've seen reviews, and they tell you, oh, thrusters don't work that way. Like some of these people are really smart for no reason. And I try to keep it basic. So most of the stuff that I write ends up having magic of some sort in it, or people who can do fantastic things. Think of like Marvel or heroes or things like that. So the science piece to it, I usually Google enough that it makes sense and what I'm writing is correct. But then when I feel myself going too deep down into the rabbit hole of technology and science to the point that it's hard to remember, it doesn't make for a fun story, then I will try to come up for a reason that maybe this event can happen from an outside means, and that's where the fantasy piece comes. So that usually revolves around my plot being tweaked because, for example, I didn't want to go deep diving too much into like thrusters or spaceships. So maybe I can learn a little bit more about how long a person can live in space before somebody comes in and teleports them away. Like something like that. That's easier for me to write about as opposed to like, how long can they stay in space and what are they eating and yada 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 for me to go down that rabbit hole. So I try to walk the thin line between the two. I usually err a little bit more side of the fantasy. Um, that's a good observation, man, and that's one of the big reasons why I keep the science part very light.
Yeah, I I don't remember who it was I spoke to about something, but they said, if you this guy had somebody he got flowers wrong in something of his one of his stories, and he's like, man,
Hmm.
people let me know that those flowers were not blooming at the time, and he said, like you just don't mums or whatever, weren't
Yeah,
blooming and it's like, come on, guys, like if that's what you're missing, then you're missing the bigger picture of the story.
it's disturbing, man, and you'd be surprised so much of how much these readers really invest in your story. The guy who helped me when I first started to try to get heavy into the writing, he was like a mentor of mine. He a practice of his is to never read the reviews, never the
Mm.
bad ones. And I actually like to read the bad ones because sometimes these people point out really good things or they have good ideas. But then also they'll check you on stuff like that, things that don't really make sense, plot holes. I even had one review call me racist. Like it was a whole thing.
Mm.
And they were talking about a character of color that I was racist towards. So like, everyone has their own opinion, and I usually tell myself 90% of these are people who can't even formulate the stuff that to even try to write half of a book. So um, just like when you're looking at a basketball game, I could never play like LeBron, but I could call him out on his trap when he's not doing what he's supposed to do. It's that type of thing.
Yeah. Go to Cirque du Soleil and be like, oh, that guy didn't nail that landing. I mean, come on.
Exactly.
I haven't done a backflip on purpose since ever. I don't think, it's like, well, since you brought that up, and let me ask you this question. This is the first question I sent you. And this has been something that I've kind of called on to is there is a tradition of that there is not a science fiction fantasy tradition from Black writers.
Right.
Where do you think there's counter arguments, and I'm going to ask you what is your counter argument, but also where does that come from? Like, where in your mind does that where does that stigma come from? And then what's your argument? I kind of speculate what your argument might be against it, but what are your thoughts on that? I don't know if stigma is the right word, but that
thought. It's a good question. So for one, I can say that the work is out there, but I was thinking about this question, and I came down to two areas for me. One, it's just plain and simple lack of representation. The work is out there. The Black writers of sci-fi, fantasy, urban fantasy, they're out there, but regardless if it's at bookstores or libraries or just the media, from my experience, those stories and those writers, they're not really pushed to the forefront as much as their counterparts. And that is a multi-leveled thing to consider. Because most of these writers are fantastic writers. Like, they've made it to bookshelves and they've landed agents. It's just not pushed to the forefront of as much. It's ironic because I will find stories written by authors of, that are not people of color, but their protagonist or the main character in their story is a person of color. And that story is pushed to the forefront more so than a story just written by a person of color or a Black person or an Asian person or a Hispanic person. And it's weird to me. It's weird. And the other part of that is that, from what I've seen, people of color, and I can speak specifically for the Black writers, is what I usually look towards, is that they write more so what's in their heart and not what's popular. So, like, around the time when young adult stuff was popping and it was really trendy, you always have the person who's like, rising up against the dictator or the nation. Think Hunger Games and things like that, or fantasy stuff like that. It's not what first comes to mind for many people of color, and I don't. That might be just a community thing, or it might be just what they like to write. From what I've seen, even with the sci-fi twist, sometimes that vision falls into the line of trendy, and that's not really what Black writers tend to lean towards. A lot of them tend to lean towards like a personal struggle that might be prevalent in the Black community, and they'll spin that around into like a fantasy style novel, or they may lean towards oppression or prejudice or things that are more common to them. My argument for that, or a good example for that, is that there's an author. I can't say her last name correctly. Her first name is Tomi, Tomi.
Oh yeah, Children of Blood and Bone.
Exactly. Yeah, and
yeah.
She's a good place to start. Her stuff is on my to read list, but I don't hear her name brought up as often in writer circles that I partake in. Regardless if that's through other writers that I know, or even if you just walk into a Barnes and Noble store, she doesn't have like a big, massive display like some of the, the Robert Pattersons or the Brandon Sandersons or the Patrick Rothfuss or the people like that. But she had, I believe, she got one of the largest author deals in history for like a person who went from traditional to represented by an agent. So her
Hmm.
talent is clearly there, and companies believed in her enough to give her that money. But it's just not it's not represented as much. You know, there are not tons of people trying to make her stuff into movies or TV shows, and even from what I understand, the steam that has been put behind those projects is kind of like stalled and slower.
Mm.
So it's the stuff is there. It's just I think a lack of representation, and then also uh, black writers tend to write what they want to and not what's immediately popular. It's a lot of layers to that. A lot of work
Yeah,
to do. My advice is support black authors if you can, or go out of your way to look for that work.
I knew that was kind of a layered question, but like that was one of the first things that you hear if you broach the subject is, well, there's just not anything. There's just not. And then you start,
Right.
I mean, you really start pulling that layer behind it, and you're like, well, wait a second. Even it was a W.E.B. Du Bois wrote a
Hmm.
science fiction speculative, and it's like, whoa, in a short story, he really knocked a lot of stuff out of the park. And you just start getting into that, and you're like, man, this argument is it's so fictional. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
so garbage. It's a terrible. There's great examples of really good speculative science fiction fantasy out there.
Hmm.
Um, and that was that again. That I think your books, especially the Warper series, was what we had. Um, hit. It was fantastic because it was great. I was like, hey, not only is this a really good book, not only is he from here in Halifax, but oh yeah, he's a person of color, and it really it helped kind of undercut that stigma, that reputation that there's not a body of work by black authors and people of color in that realm of fiction. And it
They're
just
out there.
yeah, it's hard. It's really hard to um it's hard to find even. And there now, to speak to what you said though as well, what do you let me I don't want to get down into a rabbit hole too. Um
It's all right.
well, just as far as like you mentioned people of color writing what's in their heart and not going for what's quite as popular. What um how do you find that balance? I'll ask that question. How do you go from right, and I'll say this too because it seems like you write what you want to read.
Yeah, very true.
How do you square that circle?
I think I think for me, and this is just speaking me, it's you write what you want to read, but then also you have to walk the line of how much do you want to incorporate in your real life. So, for example, if you want to write a story that you want to have that fantasy aspect of it, also, but then you may want to touch base on like um, some stuff that you might experience with that's like let's say discrimination or racism or what have you. You can put spins on it, but I think it's hard. So let's take the cliche of you know gifted people going to school for the gift, and I usually use that as my example for people who come to me for writing advice or my quote unquote students. And my good example is that Harry Potter and the X-Men are the same story. They're just told different ways. Kids, special kids go to a school. Headmaster's uber strong. Headmaster's arch rival used to be his buddy back in the day, and now two opposing sides, and that's usually the gist of it. And if you want to write something like that, but you wanted to put like a spin on it from your own personal experience, you could easily have that person who tries to get into the school, but she's not allowed in because she might be a person of color, or he might not be allowed into this school because he's a person of color. And they find out that on the lower levels of the school, there are some people getting together and they're doing like special things, and she couldn't get into the main school, and somehow or another she stumbles into this underground society of blah blah blah, and she takes what she learns there to change what's happening up top. And that's just me just spitballing, pulling stuff down. But you can incorporate those two, but then also you have to ask yourself a question as a writer: do you want to write what you feel, or do you want to get paid? And when you're first starting off, that question is very easy to answer, and that question usually just revolves around write what you feel. But once the money starts coming in, then you start to figure, well, do I want to keep doing what's true to me, or do I want to, do I want to pay some bills next month or something like that? And I feel like a lot of people of color, and it could just be because of their background, or they're just used to trial and adversity, or even if it's just as simple as working twice as hard to get half. That's what my parents always taught me coming up, and I think a lot of them stay true to what they want to write. But then you come across some who, just like Tommy, that series is about her culture, it's stuff that she's familiar with, but it has a supernatural aspect to it. There's another story called Legend Born, and I think that story is based in North Carolina, and it doesn't have any like uphill battles, but it is about a person of color who learns about some people at, I think it's at her school, or like descendants of Merlin or something like that, and it's the same thing. It's people of color doing fantastical things, but it walks the line in that genre. It's a weird space that's not publicly accepted or spoken about as much as it should. So it's going to continue to be a little bit of a battle.
Well, and it I guess there's that frustration too in just about every artistic endeavor. Like a
Yeah.
friend of mine is a musician, and there's like for every Beatles, for every Rolling Stones, for every even just mid-tier band, there's tons of bands that are just as good that just didn't get that push, or that just like that one lucky break.
Right.
But yeah, they're still pouring out great music, and they're still pouring out great books. They just don't get that next shove, or that one little break that even your mid-tier bands. And that's but it seems like that understanding of, hey, I do need to kind of balance paying bills and writing what I want has to factor in as well.
But you know what, Chris? I think this next wave of readers and writers, or this, some people just say the new generation that's coming up, I thoroughly hope that is going to change for them, and I think it will, because I'm writing now. I'm working on a new story, and my goal is to put this in front of agents and see if I can get that professional representation and deal with all the pros and cons that come with that. But you see a lot of people now, they want, like, these agents, these big writing houses, these small writing houses, they're specifically asking for these stories
Hmm.
of diversity, equality, and they want main characters that are people of color. The drawback to that is that you gotta hope that the writers that are people of color get that memo also, um,
Mm.
because see, they don't care who the writer is. They just want the characters in the story to be people of color. They want the people in the stories to represent the LGBTQ community or any other underrepresented group. So now, for any writer that sees this as thinking about writing, now is the best time to tell your story and create people in those stories that look like you, because that's what folks are looking for, is that curve of more representation comes into the industry. Now is a better time than any in the past to get your work put out there and try to break that norm of that lack of representation.
Yeah, it there's across genres, you can see
Yeah.
a lot more um, people of color. It's been easier as a librarian when it comes time for, like Hispanic Heritage Month. It's a lot
Mm.
easier to find new books from Hispanic and Latinx writers than in the past when it was like, okay, you had your stock. It's the same bunch you ran
Right.
out last year. Now it's a little bit more churned up and a little bit more. Um, it is easier to go. Let me ask you this real quick question, and we'll. So who do you want reading your books? And I know the simple answer is everybody, but who who would you hand your book to and say, hey, this is a good book? You don't have to mention your name, but like, who do you hand your books to and say enjoy?
Yeah, you're right. The good answer is, I mean, everybody's welcome to read.
Yeah.
But if I had to, walk down an aisle of people and choose who I would want to give my book to, I would lean a little bit towards the person who I don't want to say who feels like the outcast, but who may go against the grain a little bit. A person whose way of doing things might be a little bit different than the norm, and they might not be openly as accepted as much as if they were to just go with the flow. Because my characters, I love a good anti-hero. I love your Batmans, your Riddicks, like the Vin Diesel. I like the guys or the girls who by all natural means shouldn't be fitting in right now, but for some reason they find their people, they find their place, and then they make it work. And so that's what I like, and that's the people that I would say will probably get a good feel out of my books. The folks who feel like they may be underrepresented in the place, or they just can't find something kind of true. That's the big piece portion. The second book, the second series I wrote, which was a superhero series, the main character, he's a guy who's like the hero side hates him, and the villain side doesn't like him because of like his parents were like they had the Romeo and Juliet thing going, so it was like hero and a villain they got together, and then he came along, and neither side likes him, but they don't want the other side to have him. And throughout his whole journey, he's trying to figure out what do I do, where do I go, how do I fit in. One side doesn't like me, the other side's calling me names, and that's the kind of thing I feel like a lot of people, especially young people, who are just coming into the world, or they're trying to figure out, like, from that age of 18, I'll say 29 now. Like, you're trying to figure out which way to go. And it's a good read to kind of lose yourself, but see yourself in the characters a little bit too.
And see, that hits another. I could rant. That was another great thing about both series of your books is that not only did it check a lot of boxes that were great to check, but it's also
Mhm.
like, oh, hey, I could hand this to a mom and her kids. And they probably, if they were into science fiction, or, if the mom was trying to be cool, she could read the
Right.
book and the kid could read the book, and you hit just this perfect little level of, it's not too kiddie for adults, but it's not too adult for kids. I just, it's an awesome. I love when people can thread a needle like that and just get a bunch of different things going all at once. It's really cool. I could rant and rave about, because they're just, it's not every day that, especially too, the other thing I'll say, and then leave it alone, is it was great that we could hand that to boys of that middle grade
Mm.
level, because there's not, as a librarian, you look around and there's not a whole lot that you can hand a kid who's 14, that the parents are like, hey, what do we get this kid to like to read? And
Yeah.
it's hard. It's a really hard spot. Like, it's easy for girls, you can hand them anything and they'd be like, oh yeah, I love it.
Right.
Boys, it's like, God, if it's not capturing their attention in 15 minutes, it's going in the
Gone.
trash. And so I
Gone.
always appreciated that. I was like, well, let's roll let's throw Riley Toon at him and see if it sticks. And a lot of times it did. So it saved my bacon as a librarian many times. I'm gonna
I
roll the
appreciate it.
dice and come up sevens with you. So again, I could rant about that. Well, listen, I appreciate your time and your effort, and really do. I appreciate your books. They're fantastic in that regard for a lot of reasons. Not only as a person who hands out books as candy, but also somebody who's read them and appreciates, like, oh God, this guy's hitting a lot of, he's checking a lot of boxes off that that need to be checked off. So I appreciate it. Um, and thank you for your time.
Thank you,
There's
man.
big lessons here in the fact that there's always a light bill. You're always going to have to be hustling as a writer, and then you get to go home and start typing, and that's
It's true, and I'll tell this to anybody who sees this who might want to be a writer in the future, regardless if you're indie or traditionally published. Um, the word of truth that no one told me is the more successful you get, the better and the faster you have to perform. I know when my
mm,
last book was released, the book came out. Let's say it came out on a Monday. Some people got it and they liked it and they left a review. And then maybe on a Wednesday, there was people asking in the reviews, "Oh, I can't wait for the next one. When's the next one come out?" And then people reach out to you, and you don't see that on the back end of this. It's like it's a 6 month, 7 month process.
mhm.
Um, it's can't just chunk them out. And it's weird to being on the other side of the spectrum, going from hoping someone reads your books and being sad when they don't, to cursing under your breath, like, dude, I just gave you a book. And you want another one? So it's
Yeah.
and I'm not even like a huge name. I'm making an okay amount of money, but it's not like quit your day job money. But it only gets worse with the more success you get. So word to the wise, count your blessings, but be happy
You might have to start splitting with a ghostwriter too. Dare I say
for 'em. Oh
that?
man,
It's like, oh no, 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 no! Please don't go that route. But
no.
yeah, okay, well, cool. I again, I appreciate it, and thanks for stopping by with us.
Hey, thank you so much, Chris. Anytime.
Sure.